The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard as Sergeant Marcus Thompson adjusted his red tunic and straightened his bearskin hat. 23 years of service to the Crown had taught him that Saturdays brought the worst. Crowds. Tourists from every corner of the world would flood the palace grounds, cameras clicking, voices chattering in dozens of languages, all hoping to catch a glimpse of royal life. Marcus had seen it all during his decades as a Queen's Guard. The wide-eyed children who stared in wonder at his stoic expression, the teenagers who tried to make him laugh with silly faces and jokes, and the adults who seemed to forget that beneath the ceremonial uniform stood a highly trained soldier with real responsibilities. But lately, something had changed. The tourists were becoming bolder, more intrusive, and far less respectful of the ancient traditions he was sworn to protect. As he took his position outside the main entrance, Marcus could already see the early, morning visitors gathering beyond the iron gates. A tour group from Japan was assembling near the fountain, their guide waving a small flag and speaking rapidly into a microphone. A family with young children was setting up what appeared to be a picnic blanket dangerously close to the restricted area. 3 young men with heavy camera equipment were eyeing the ceremonial posts with the kind of calculating look that made Marcus's jaw tighten. The palace had strict protocols about tourist behavior. No crossing the white lines painted on the ground. No touching the guards or their equipment. No blocking the pathways during the changing of the guard ceremony. These weren't arbitrary rules designed to spoil anyone's fun. They were essential safety measures that had evolved over centuries of balancing public access with security needs. Marcus remembered his first day on duty, when his commanding officer had explained the delicate balance they maintained. The royal family wanted the public to feel welcome and connected to their heritage, but they also needed protection from the small percentage of visitors who couldn't control themselves. Over the years, Marcus had witnessed proposals gone wrong, when couples tried to use the guards as props, protesters who attempted to chain themselves to the gates, and even tourists who had climbed over barriers to take selfies, completely oblivious to the security risks they were creating. The irony wasn't lost on him that his imposing presence, designed to command respect and maintain order, had somehow become part of the tourist attraction itself. Videos of guards, breaking their stoic composure to shout warnings at misbehaving tourists, regularly went viral on social media, turning serious security incidents into entertainment. This only seemed to encourage more people to test the boundaries, hoping to become the next viral sensation. As the clock tower chimed 9, signaling the official opening of the public areas, Marcus watched the gates swing open. The crowd surged, forward with an energy that immediately put him on alert. He could spot the troublemakers within seconds, the group of university students who were already pushing the boundaries by walking too close to the restricted areas, the man with the professional camera who was clearly planning to ignore the photography guidelines, and most concerning of all, a young couple who seemed to think the entire palace was their personal photo studio. The morning started quietly enough, with most visitors maintaining respectful distances and following the clearly marked pathways. Children pressed their faces against the approved viewing areas, parents snapped photos from the designated zones, and elderly tourists sat on the permitted benches to rest their feet. But Marcus knew from experience that it only took one person to cross the line for the entire atmosphere to shift. Sure enough, within 30 minutes of opening, he spotted movement in his peripheral vision. The young couple had ducked under the rope barrier and were walking directly toward his post, the woman already holding her phone out for what was clearly intended to be an up-close selfie. The man was gesturing for her to get closer, apparently oblivious to the fact that they had just violated multiple security protocols. Marcus felt his muscles tense as years of training kicked in. He had dealt with this scenario hundreds of times before, but each incident required careful judgment. Too little response and other tourists would think the rules didn't matter. Too much force and the palace would face criticism for being heavy-handed with well-meaning visitors. The balance was everything, and in the next few moments Marcus would have to make decisions that could escalate into an international incident or defuse into just another forgotten moment in royal protocol. The couple continued their approach, completely absorbed in their phone screen and apparently unaware that they had just triggered one of the most experienced guards in the Queen's service. Marcus could see other tourists beginning to notice the situation, phones coming out to record whatever was about to happen. The morning that had started with routine ceremonial duties was about to become something much more significant, though none of the participants quite realized it yet. The couple approached with the casual confidence of people who had never considered that rules might actually apply to them. Sarah Chen, a travel blogger from California, was live streaming the entire experience to her followers, while her boyfriend, Jake Martinez, filmed with a professional camera for what he called his European adventure documentary. They had spent the previous evening researching the best angles for photos with the Queen's guards, completely missing the numerous signs and warnings about respecting boundaries. Marcus watched their approach with the trained eye of someone who had learned to read tourist behavior like a battlefield tactical manual. The woman was focused entirely on her phone screen, adjusting her hair and checking her appearance while walking backwards toward him. The man behind the camera was encouraging her to get closer, apparently believing that the ceremonial guards were simply part of the palace decoration rather than active security personnel. Other tourists had begun to notice the developing situation. A group of German visitors lowered their guidebooks and watched with growing concern. An elderly British couple shook their heads disapprovingly, the husband muttering something about proper respect to his wife. Most significantly, several other tourists began taking out their phones to record, sensing that something dramatic was about to happen. Sarah continued her live commentary as she approached, completely unaware of the growing tension. "So this is what makes British tourism so amazing," she told her audience, gesturing toward Marcus without actually looking at him. "These guards just stand here all day in their cute outfits, and you can get incredibly close for the perfect shot. My followers are going to absolutely love this content." Jake zoomed in on the intricate details of Marcus's uniform, noting the polished brass buttons and the pristine white belt for his documentary footage. He had read online that the guards were trained not to react to tourists, which he interpreted as permission to treat them like museum displays rather than living, breathing human beings with serious responsibilities. Marcus could feel his heartbeat steady into the controlled rhythm he had learned during combat training. His eyes remained fixed on the horizon, but his peripheral vision tracked every movement. The couple was now less than 3 feet away, well inside the security perimeter that had been established for both tourist safety and operational security. Standard protocol required him to issue a verbal warning before they came any closer. The morning crowd had swelled to over 200 people, many of whom were now watching the unfolding drama instead of admiring the architecture or learning about royal history. Marcus could see palace security personnel in civilian clothes beginning to move subtly through the crowd, positioning themselves for potential crowd control if the situation escalated beyond a simple verbal warning. Sarah finally looked up from her phone screen and made direct eye contact with Marcus for the first time. What she saw in his expression should have been enough to make any reasonable person reconsider their approach, but instead, she interpreted his professional composure as an invitation to continue. "Oh my God, he's so serious and handsome," she announced to her live audience. "This is going to be the most amazing selfie ever." Jake had moved around to capture what he hoped would be the guard's reaction when his girlfriend posed next to him. He had seen videos online of tourists getting stern warnings from guards, and he thought documenting such a moment would add authenticity and drama to his travel documentary. What he failed to understand was that those viral videos represented security protocols being activated, not entertainment being provided. The crucial moment arrived when Sarah reached out her hand, intending to place it on Marcus's ceremonial sword for what she called an action shot. This crossed every possible line of appropriate tourist behavior and triggered immediate security responses that had been drilled into Marcus through thousands of hours of training. Marcus's voice cut through the morning air with the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Step back immediately," he commanded, his voice carrying across the entire courtyard and causing every conversation to stop mid-sentence. The sound was powerful enough to startle birds from the nearby trees and make several small children grab their parents' hands. The sudden transformation from silent ceremonial figure to active security officer sent shockwaves through the crowd. Sarah stumbled backward, her phone nearly slipping from her suddenly trembling hands. Jake's camera shook as he tried to process what had just happened. The other tourists moved instinctively away from the confrontation, creating a widening circle around the incident. But the warning, delivered with decades of authority and training, was only the beginning of what would become a much larger situation involving palace security, social media consequences, and international attention that none of the participants had anticipated. The power of Marcus's command reverberated through the courtyard like a physical force. Sarah stumbled backward so quickly that she nearly collided with Jake, who was still filming but had gone completely pale. The couple had expected, perhaps, a gentle request to move back, not the full authority of a military professional whose job was to protect the royal family and maintain order at one of the world's most significant historical sites. Marcus continued in his commanding voice, each word precisely articulated and carrying the weight of centuries of royal protocol. You have crossed into a restricted security zone. Move back behind the designated barriers immediately and keep your hands visible at all times. His tone left no room for negotiation or casual dismissal. The crowd reaction was immediate and dramatic. Parents grabbed their children and moved them further away from the confrontation. Elderly tourists who had been peacefully enjoying their visit suddenly found themselves witnesses to what appeared to be a serious security incident. The jovial atmosphere of morning sightseeing transformed into tense silence, broken only by the clicking of phone cameras as dozens of people began recording the encounter. Sarah's live stream was still running, broadcasting the entire incident to her followers in real time. Comments began flooding in from viewers around the world, ranging from support for the guards' professionalism to criticism of the tourists' behavior. The video was being shared and reshared across social media platforms before the confrontation had even concluded. Jake lowered his camera slightly, finally beginning to understand that they had seriously misjudged the situation. He had expected to capture footage of a quaint British tradition, not document what appeared to be a legitimate security response. The guard's presence suddenly felt far more imposing, and Jake realized that beneath the ceremonial uniform stood someone with real authority and extensive training. Palace security officers in plain clothes began moving through the crowd with practiced efficiency. They had been monitoring the situation from the moment the couple crossed the barrier, and Marcus's verbal warning was their signal to implement crowd control procedures. Their job was to manage the growing audience while allowing the ceremonial guard to handle the immediate security concern. Marcus maintained his position, but shifted into what his training manual called active threat assessment mode. His eyes systematically scanned the crowd for any indication that other tourists might interpret the situation as an opportunity to test boundaries themselves. Experience had taught him that security incidents often triggered copycat behavior from visitors who wanted their own viral moment. The couple now stood frozen about 10 feet away, clearly uncertain about what they were supposed to do next. Sarah had finally ended her live stream, but the damage was already done. The video was spreading across social media platforms at exponential rates. Jake continued filming, though his hands were noticeably shaking as the reality of their situation became clear. Marcus spoke again, his voice slightly less commanding but still unmistakably authoritative. Photography is permitted from designated areas only. Crossing security barriers is a serious offense that can result in arrest and prosecution. I am directing you to return to the public viewing areas and remain there for the duration of your visit. An elderly man in the crowd called out in a distinctly British accent. Good on you, soldier. Some people need to learn proper respect. This comment seemed to embolden other tourists who had been quietly disapproving of the couple's behavior. A small chorus of approval rippled through the crowd, creating an uncomfortable dynamic where the American tourists found themselves the target of international criticism. Sarah finally found her voice, though it came out much smaller and shakier than her confident live stream commentary. "We're sorry, we didn't know we weren't supposed to," she began, but Marcus cut her off with a slight gesture. "Ignorance of clearly posted regulations is not an acceptable excuse," he replied firmly. "Multiple signs in several languages clearly indicate the boundaries of public access areas. You chose to ignore these warnings." The situation was now drawing attention from palace officials monitoring the security cameras. A supervisor was already en route to assess whether the incident required formal documentation or if it could be resolved with the verbal warning and crowd management procedures already in place. Jake finally spoke up, his documentary filmmaker, persona completely abandoned. "Sir, we really didn't mean any disrespect. We're just tourists trying to capture memories of our trip." His American accent seemed to emphasize their outsider status among the predominantly British and European crowd. Marcus's response was measured but unwavering. "Intent is irrelevant when security protocols are violated. Your actions could have been interpreted as a threat requiring immediate physical intervention. You are fortunate that verbal commands were sufficient to resolve this situation." The weight of his words hit both tourists simultaneously, as they realized how close they had come to being physically restrained or arrested by palace security. What had started as an attempt to create engaging social media content had escalated into a serious international incident that was already being viewed by thousands of people online. Within minutes of the confrontation, the incident had already begun spreading across social media platforms with remarkable speed. Sarah's live stream had been watched by over 3,000 followers in real time, and the recording was being downloaded, edited, and reshared across multiple platforms. The hashtag #JaboyRoyalGuard warning was beginning to trend, as viewers debated whether the couple deserved the stern treatment they had received. Palace Security Supervisor Janet Morrison arrived, on the scene with the quiet efficiency that came from 30 years of managing tourist incidents. She assessed the situation quickly, noting the dispersed crowd, the clearly shaken American couple, and Marcus maintaining his professional composure despite the disruption to what should have been a routine ceremonial duty. Morrison approached the couple with practiced diplomacy. Unlike Marcus, whose role required unwavering authority, her job was to de-escalate situations while ensuring that security protocols were properly enforced. "I'm Janet Morrison, head of visitor security," she introduced herself. "I need to speak with you both about what happened here this morning." Sarah and Jake followed Morrison to a discreet area where they could speak without the constant attention of phone cameras and curious onlookers. The reality of their situation was beginning to sink in, as they realized this was not going to end with a simple apology and a warning to be more careful in the future. "Your behavior this morning violated several serious security protocols," Morrison explained, her tone professional but not unkind. "Crossing the designated barriers, attempting to touch ceremonial equipment, and ignoring multiple posted warnings about restricted areas. These actions could have resulted in your immediate arrest and prosecution under British law." Jake's documentary, camera hung unused around his neck as he struggled to process the legal implications. "We honestly had no idea it was that serious," he said. "In America, most tourist sites are much more casual about photography and getting close to exhibits." Morrison nodded with the patience of someone who had explained cultural differences to confused tourists many times before. "This is not a museum or a theme park," she said. "This is an active royal residence with working security protocols. The guards you see are not performers or actors. They are active military personnel responsible for protecting the royal family and maintaining public safety." Meanwhile, the incident was gaining international attention online. News outlets had already picked up the story, with headlines ranging from "American tourists confronted by Queen's Guard" to "Royal security protocols demonstrated after tourist boundary violation." The couple's names had been identified through their social media accounts, and they were beginning to receive both supportive and critical messages from around the world. Marcus remained at his post, but the morning's incident had fundamentally changed the dynamic of his duty. Other tourists were now giving him an unusually wide berth, and parents were using the recent confrontation as a teaching moment for their children about respecting rules and authority. Several visitors approached the barriers to take photos, but were noticeably more careful about maintaining proper distances. The German tour group that had witnessed the entire incident was discussing it animatedly in their native language, with their guide explaining the historical significance of the Queen's Guard and why such strict protocols existed. The elderly British couple was still nearby, the husband continuing to express approval for how the situation had been handled. Back in the security office, Morrison was explaining the potential consequences to Sarah and Jake. Under normal circumstances, this type of violation could result in a formal warning that goes on record with immigration authorities, potentially affecting future visits to the United Kingdom. In more serious cases, we have the authority to pursue charges for trespassing on government property. Sarah's face had gone completely white as she realized how badly they had underestimated the seriousness of royal protocol. "Please, we really didn't know," she said. "We've been traveling through Europe for 3 weeks and nothing like this happened anywhere else. We thought it would be like visiting any other tourist attraction." Morrison appreciated their apparent sincerity, but she also had responsibilities beyond managing tourist misunderstandings. "The difference is that other tourist attractions don't involve active security operations protecting members of the royal family," she explained. "Every protocol exists for specific safety and security reasons developed over centuries of experience." The EEA supervisor was also aware that the incident was already becoming international news, which added another layer of complexity to how it needed to be handled. The palace had to balance public relations concerns with the need to maintain security protocols and demonstrate that rules applied equally to all visitors regardless of their nationality or social media following. As Morrison continued her discussion with the couple, palace officials were monitoring the social media response and preparing statements about tourist safety and the importance of respecting security protocols. The incident was becoming a teaching moment for millions of people about the difference between tourist entertainment and serious security operations. By noon, the incident had exploded across international social media with a reach that surprised even experienced palace communication staff. The original live stream video had been viewed over 50,000 times, and edited versions were spreading across TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at an exponential rate. News outlets from CNN to the BBC were running stories about the confrontation, turning what had been a routine security enforcement into a global discussion about tourist behavior and cultural respect. Sarah and Jake found themselves at the center of an international controversy they never could have imagined. Their hotel room phone had been ringing constantly with media requests, and their social media accounts were flooded with comments from around the world. Some supporters argued that the guards' response was unnecessarily harsh for what they saw as an innocent mistake, while others praised the professionalism and restraint shown by palace security. The couple's situation became more complex when they discovered that several major news organizations were using their images and personal information without permission. Their names, ages, hometowns, and even details about their jobs back in California had been published in articles analyzing the incident. What had started as an attempt to create content for Sarah's travel blog had turned into unwanted international notoriety. Morrison met with the couple again that afternoon to discuss the resolution of their case. The palace had decided to handle the incident with a formal warning, rather than pursuing criminal charges. But there were conditions attached to this lenient treatment. "You will be required to participate in an educational program about royal protocols and British cultural expectations," Morrison explained. "Additionally, any future visits to royal properties will be subject to enhanced screening procedures." The educational component was more comprehensive than either tourist had expected. They spent 3 hours with a protocol officer learning about the history of the Queen's Guard, the security challenges facing royal residences, and the cultural significance of traditions that many tourists viewed simply as entertainment. The session included video examples of how tourist behavior had evolved over the decades and why certain rules had been established. During the educational session, Sarah and Jake began to understand the broader context of their actions. They learned that the Queen's Guard dealt with inappropriate tourist behavior daily, ranging from people trying to touch them to more serious incidents involving individuals with mental health issues or actual security threats. The guards had to be prepared for any possibility, which meant treating every protocol violation as potentially serious. The protocol officer, a retired military historian named Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, explained the delicate balance the palace maintained. "We want the public to feel welcome and connected to their royal heritage," she said. "But we also have an absolute responsibility to maintain security and preserve traditions that have been carefully developed over centuries. Every rule exists for specific, important reasons." Meanwhile, the incident continued to generate international discussion about tourism ethics and cultural sensitivity. Travel bloggers and social media influencers began using the incident as a case study in responsible tourism, while cultural commentators debated whether modern tourist expectations were compatible with traditional institutions. Marcus completed his duty shift at 2 p.m., having maintained his professional composure despite the ongoing attention from tourists who had heard about the morning's incident. His commanding officer commended him for his handling of the situation, noting that his measured response had de-escalated what could have become a much more serious security incident. The Palace Communications Department issued a statement late that afternoon, emphasizing their commitment to public access while reinforcing the importance of respecting security protocols. "We welcome millions of visitors each year and are proud to share our heritage with people from around the world," the statement read. "However, the safety of our visitors, staff, and the royal family must remain our highest priority." Sarah and Jake's experience had become an unintended educational opportunity for tourists worldwide. Travel advisory websites began updating their guidance about visiting royal sites, emphasizing the importance of respecting barriers and understanding that ceremonial guards were active security personnel rather than entertainment figures. Evening, the couple had completed their educational requirements and were preparing to continue their European vacation with a much deeper understanding of cultural sensitivity and tourist responsibility. Their experience had been humbling and stressful, but they recognized that they had learned valuable lessons about respecting local customs and understanding the serious nature of security protocols at significant historical sites. The incident had also sparked broader conversations about social media tourism and the pressure many travelers felt to create dramatic content for their online audiences, sometimes at the expense of appropriate behavior and cultural respect. 3 days after the incident, the story had evolved into something far beyond what anyone involved had anticipated. The video had been viewed over 2 million times across all platforms, spawning countless reaction videos, cultural analysis, pieces, and discussions about appropriate tourist behavior. Sarah and Jake had become inadvertent symbols of a broader conversation about respect for cultural institutions and the responsibilities that came with social media influence. The couple decided to address the situation directly by creating a thoughtful response video that acknowledged their mistakes and shared what they had learned from the experience. Sarah, speaking directly to her followers, explained how the incident had changed her perspective on travel and cultural sensitivity. "I want to be completely honest with you all," she said. "We messed up. We treated a serious security situation like it was entertainment, and we're incredibly grateful that the palace staff chose to educate us rather than simply punish us." Jake's documentary project had taken an unexpected turn as well. Instead of the lighthearted travel adventure he had originally planned, he found himself creating a serious examination of cultural differences and the impact of social media on tourism behavior. The footage from that morning had become the centerpiece of a much more meaningful story about learning from mistakes and respecting traditions that existed long before the age of viral videos. The educational impact of the incident extended far beyond the couple themselves. Tourism boards across Europe began updating their visitor guidelines to address social media-driven behavior, and several major travel influencers started discussing the importance of researching cultural expectations before visiting significant historical sites. The hashtag #FonerRespectfulTourism began trending as travelers shared their own experiences, learning about local customs and protocols. Marcus returned to his regular duties, but the incident had reinforced his belief in the importance of maintaining standards regardless of changing social media culture. His commanding officer noted that the professional way he had handled the situation had actually enhanced public understanding of the Queen's Guard's role, with many of the online discussions praising his restraint and professionalism. Palace. Security had also learned valuable lessons from the incident. Morrison and her team began developing new strategies for managing the increasing number of tourists who seemed more focused on creating social media content than experiencing historical sites respectfully. They implemented additional educational signage and started working with social media platforms to promote responsible tourism content. The international media attention gradually shifted from criticism of the tourists to broader discussions about the challenges facing historical institutions in the digital age. Cultural experts noted that the incident highlighted the tension between maintaining public access to heritage sites and preserving the dignity and security of important traditions. Sarah and Jake completed their European vacation with a fundamentally different approach to travel documentation. Instead of seeking dramatic confrontations or boundary-pushing content, they focused on learning about and respectfully sharing the cultural significance of the places they visited. Their follower engagement actually increased as audiences appreciated their more thoughtful and educational approach to travel content. 6 months later, the couple received an unexpected invitation to return to London as part of a cultural exchange program. The palace, recognizing that their experience had generated meaningful discussions about tourism and cultural respect, asked them to participate in a documentary about responsible visiting practices at historical sites. Their story had come full circle from embarrassing mistake to educational opportunity. The incident became a case study used in tourism education programs and cultural sensitivity training for social media influencers. Dr. Heartfelt, who had conducted their educational session, began incorporating their story into her lectures about the evolution of tourism in the digital age. Marcus continued his service with the Queen's Guard, occasionally recognizing tourists who seemed to have learned from the viral video of his stern warning. The incident had become part of palace lore, representing the careful balance between public access and security that defined modern royal institutions. The lasting impact of those few minutes on a Saturday morning in London demonstrated how quickly local incidents could become global conversations in the digital age. What had started as a simple case of tourists overstepping boundaries had evolved into an international dialogue about respect, responsibility, and the importance of understanding cultural context when visiting places of historical and institutional significance. The story served as a reminder that even in an age of casual social media sharing and viral content creation, some institutions and traditions deserved approaches grounded in respect, awareness, and genuine cultural appreciation, rather than entertainment value alone.